Hello, everybody. We're going to go through and talk briefly about the theoretical perspectives and how they apply to culture. The first of these is going to be structural functionalism. Remember back from our earlier chapters, we first introduced structural functionalism. Functionalism is a macro level view of society. So again, a big picture view at or big chunks of our society or the society as a whole is what we're going to be looking at when we are wearing our structural functionalist glasses per se and looking out at society and why society works in the way that it does. So when a functionalist looks at culture, culture is essentially the glue that holds the members of a society together. Think of a brick wall and the mortar that goes in between all the bricks. You are a brick, I am a brick, everybody's a brick, and the mortar that connects us all is culture, according to a functionalist. Excuse me. So when we have a society and all these different people in a society, we need culture in order to make us operate as a society. Key to this is a shared language, shared values and beliefs, so that we can communicate with one another and so that we value and believe generally in the same things. It's important that we all value the same kinds of things, because if we have radically different values, we would not operate efficiently as a unified group, as a society. So culture is a way to make this all happen. Remember, when you're thinking about functionalism, think about your body or a machine, right? And the different parts in the machine that make the machine work, or the different parts in your body that all have a purpose that make your body work so that you can be alive. Well, with functionalism, culture is one of those parts of our society. It's there because we need it, and if we didn't have it, our society either wouldn't work right or it wouldn't work at all. So this is how functionalists see culture. Okay, this is their worldview on culture. Now, this is going to be radically different from how a social conflict theorist would look at culture. Remember that social conflict theory, like all forms of conflict theory, the different forms of conflict theory being social conflict theory, gender conflict theory, race conflict theory, all of them have to do with inequality. All of them are about inequality. It's just who is unequal is going to be the focus based on which form of conflict theory you're looking at. With social conflict theory, the inequality that's being focused on is about the wealthy and everybody else, right? The owners and the wealthiest in our society, and the workers, and people who earn a paycheck in our society. And when a conflict theorist looks at culture, a conflict theorist will make the observation that culture exists in the way that it does because it benefits those people at the very, very top. Those owners in our society benefit from our culture being created the way that it is. And everybody else, the workers in our society, people that get a paycheck as a way to support themselves, they suffer because of this. Now, a really great way to help understand and visualize this is to look back at our values and belief systems that we got in one of the earlier videos and earlier in the PowerPoint presentation. Take a look at these key values of the United States: equal opportunity, achievement and success, individualism, progress, science, democracy for enterprise, all these things, right? These are all also characteristics of capitalism. Okay, these are characteristics of capitalism, especially, and this is one of the reasons why I focused on it so much in the last video, individualism, right? It is the individual. People are taught to value and believe that it is the individual that is of utmost importance, right? Me, myself, and I, right? That is what I should be focused on. That is what is important. As long as I am okay financially, then and the people around my immediate family, my spouse, my children, as long as that is fine, well, then I care much less about how everybody else is, right? This is individualism showing. And again, a key part of why social conflict theorists look at culture and see culture as benefiting those at the very top at the expense of everybody else. So that we culturally value competitiveness. We culturally value the mass accumulation of wealth, right? We think that that is great. One day that's going to be me. One day that's going to be us, right? Except it very often does not work that way. But as long as we think that and believe that, then the people at the very top of our economic spectrum are safer, right? Because Americans will not challenge the system. They will not challenge capitalism. They will not challenge the way that our culture is designed and that we value individualism instead of collectivism, which makes a much safer position for those who are already extremely successful. Okay? This is a social conflict interpretation of culture. One other theory that we haven't talked about before, it is not one of our major theoretical perspectives, but is relevant to culture, is what's known as sociobiology. And sociobiology is a theory that has a lot of evidence that negates this theory. There is very little evidence that supports this theory. But I think it's still important for you to know and for us to talk about, because you will likely encounter sociobiological arguments and sociobiological theories as you go about your life. You are likely familiar with some sociobiological theories of the past. What sociobiology says is that not all human beings that are alive today are the same level of evolution. Think to your science class when you saw that evolutionary chart that showed a primate-looking being on this side, a fully developed human being on this side, and then steps in between as this primate evolved into this human being that we know today. What sociobiology says is that not all human beings alive today are this fully developed human being. That some human beings that are alive today now are somewhere less than this and closer to the primate. And the way that you can tell who is who is by looking at their cultural patterns and their cultural traits. Okay? So if a group of people has a quote unquote developed or advanced culture, well, then that means that they are this fully developed human being on the evolutionary chart. And the further away from that quote unquote fully developed advanced culture a group of people gets, then the lower and closer to the primate they are on this scale. Now, this, of course, is incorrect. And it contradicts one of the important lessons of culture, that there is no hierarchy of culture. There is just different cultures. Like there is no hierarchy of symbols, there's just different symbols. There's no better or worse symbol. There's no hierarchy of culture either. There's no better or worse culture. There are cultures that we are more familiar with or accustomed to, and there are cultures that we are less familiar with and less accustomed to. But they aren't better, or one is not better than the other. Okay? Sociobiological arguments were used to justify the Holocaust. So the Nazis in Nazi Germany used sociobiological theories to commit the Holocaust against who they deemed as undesirables. This included people of Jewish descent. This included the Gypsies. This included homosexuals and other ethnic and racial minorities. And their justification for this is that these people weren't really people, right? They were not this fully developed human being, what the Nazis referred to as the perfect, the Aryan race, right? They were something less than that, closer to the primate. So it was okay then if we exterminate them. In fact, it's important that we do exterminate them, according to the Nazis. Sociobiological arguments were used to justify the slave trade. Okay, these people from the African continent that were bringing over and brutalizing and enslaving and killing by the tens of thousands. Well, these aren't really fully developed people, right? These are savages. These are something not fully developed. They're closer to the primate. So it's okay if we do these things. We would never do these horrible things to people, but these aren't people. So that's okay, is their way of thinking. Sociobiological arguments were also used to justify westward expansion and the systematic extermination of the native peoples in America. Again, these people are savages, right? These aren't really people, right? Look at the culture that they have. They don't even have flags and castles. They don't even have these kinds of things that everybody should have if they're a developed human, right? So of course they aren't really fully human. So it's okay if we treat them this way and exterminate them. Okay? We don't have to go that far back in the past to hear these kinds of sociobiological arguments. Just in the last few years, they are becoming more and more common. In fact, within the last decade, there was a book published that made it to the New York Times list that was making sociobiological arguments in favor of people of European descent, whose thesis was that people of European descent have inherently better and more advanced brains than people who are not of European descent. That it would be possible to craft a math equation that only a person of European descent could answer, right? That it would be impossible for a person who is not of European descent to answer this question. Of course, this is false and incorrect, but again, it made it to the New York Times bestsellers list within the last 10 years. So you might see these kinds of arguments as you are browsing the internet. You might hear these kinds of arguments coming out of the mouths of people that you work with, or people on television or radio or in podcasts or online. And it's important to know where this ideology comes from, what its underpinnings are, so that you can decide for yourself how much credence you want to put into an argument that's being framed in that way. Okay? Again, there is very, very little evidence that supports sociobiological theory, and enormous evidence that directly refutes it. And it is most often used to justify the maltreatment of a group of people. Okay? Normally by dominant groups against subordinate groups. So these are the different theoretical approaches and interpretations that we're going to apply to culture. Structural functionalism. Culture is the glue that holds us all together. Key to that are our value systems and our belief systems. Social conflict theory. Culture is a means of perpetuating inequality. Culture is designed to teach everyone to value capitalism and to value those tenets of capitalism because it is beneficial for the highest members of our economic strata that we all think and believe that way. And sociobiology, which says that not all human beings are fully developed human beings, and that the way you can tell who's not a fully developed human being is by their cultural pattern. Again, a widely debunked way of thinking, but one that persists nonetheless. I'd be interested to hear your comments and feedback. So if you would, please leave a note in the comment and feedback section below. If you have any questions or would like to discuss, again, you can send me an email or drop into my office hours. Take care.